You're listening to Porn Free Masculinity, where you connect to your recovery and your destiny.
Hey guys, glad to be back again with my friend Rob on the mirror. We want to look into the mirror together and get curious about some things that are going on in our lives. And Rob, one of the things that I have really been struck by is when I'm talking to guys in recovery, it could be in support group meetings, it could be, guys who are calling about doing some recovery coaching, it could be just friends who struggle like I do. Every time we get into this conversation, the topic of controlling my behavior comes up.
Yeah.
And it's like, the strategies around how do I control my behavior? How do I stop looking at these particular things or stop acting out in this way? And it goes down that road of, using filters, which I want to be very clear. I'm not for or against filters. They just are. They can be useful tools. But I think a lot of guys are so obsessed, and frankly, a lot of guys' spouses are so obsessed with controlling the behavior that if the behavior just goes away, if I just try harder, if I just knuckle down, then this thing will go away. And that's the starting point for almost every guy that I talk to in this area of recovery from sexual brokenness and compulsive porn use. So when you hear that, when you think about that, what kind of comes up in your mind in your process?
Yeah. First of all, great to be with you. And
you too, buddy. Always.
Thank you for the question. I think behavior management has a place in the recovery journey. So you can disagree with me on that. But for me, I would say me too, to all of what you shared in a lot of ways. But at the beginning, behavior management has to be part. That's a strong statement, is usually part of the process because for me, and I'll just get this real localized, for me, I was used to behaving and acting and thinking a certain way. And so behavior management is one way of helping kind of reshape those thoughts, those actions, those reactions. Specifically in certain settings, it helps me become more aware of who I was in certain places. I'll just give you an idea. As I was starting to examine my objectification of women and really become conscious to that behavior, that choice of mine, I realized, and this really became super scary for me, I realized my eyes were like heat-sinking missiles wherever I was in any public setting. They could find an attractive woman no matter where she was in the room, whether it was a large, box store or whether it was a small and more intimate setting. And, so for me, behavior management was a really important part at the beginning of the journey. Now that's okay. I think it has its season of the recovery journey. If that's what if that's what the journey only becomes about, or if that's where it stays locked in, I tell you what, brothers are in for a really long, difficult, bumpy ride because this journey is nothing about behavior management at the end.
Yeah. I'm curious because, I'm not a young man. I'm a 45-year-old man. So obviously I'm not just looking at young women anymore. I mean, there's middle-aged women that are somewhat attractive sometimes when I run across them in the grocery store or whatever. So how is it that you would say, because if I'm always supposed to avert my eyes, like I'm never supposed to look at a woman with lust in my eyes, right? That would obviously be not recovering. Would you agree?
Sure.
Yeah. So how am I supposed to change that behavior other than just, using the old Bob Newhart line, which is stop it. Stop it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, wouldn't that be great, by the way, if that was it, right?
That's all it took. Stop it.
Top shelf at Walgreens. It's on sale for $8.99. Buy one, get one free. Yeah. Gosh, this is it, right? That question is the heart of what recovery and the journey of getting out of addiction and really living a more holistic, integrated life is all about. And I'm going to use somebody else's words because I was just scrolling on Instagram. I follow Dr. Gabor Mate, and he asked 3 simple questions of a a woman who was stuck in addiction, and he basically said, when you choose to act out, what are you experiencing? She goes, fear and terror. He goes,
fear and terror.
Is there anything wrong with fear and terror? She goes, well, no, they're actually important. He says, exactly. He says, so when you choose to act out to relieve yourself of fear and terror, what you're really doing is identifying something that's not the problem. Like the acting out is not the problem. It's what you're feeling and how you choose to relate to that is really at the heart of addiction. And Nate says it, Nate Larkin says it's the same thing, right? Acting out is not my biggest problem. It's my favorite solution. And
so let me add one more word: fear, terror, and even shame.
Yeah.
Because I think when I and Jay Stringer says this, I don't act out of my desire to get high or my desire to escape. I act out of my self-identity of shame.
Yes.
It is that there is an experience in me that says you deserve to feel like this. Yeah, you have a lollipop in the process. But ultimately, where it brings me back to when I go back to my compulsive coping behaviors is I'm still the same piece of shit that I always felt like I was. And so it's almost like that the condemnation, I'm going to use that word, the condemnation I put on myself when I act out and the way that I use condemning and judgmental attitudes and motivations to try to stop that same behavior is self-defeating.
Yes.
Because I'm starting with shame and I'm thinking that that's going to lead me away from shame. And instead it just loops me right back around.
Yeah. Yeah. It's its own self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Right. And whether, that's the shame, that's the addiction loop. Right. So yeah, is behavior management the end of the solution? No, because the behavior is not the problem. It points you to something much deeper within. And I think that's where the real work of recovery starts. That's the heavy lifting. That's the journey. And it's exactly what you talked about. It's going back to trace, where did I pick up these faulty core beliefs about myself? Right. Where did I start to create this idea that I am X, Y, and Z, or I will always or never be good enough, or fill in the blank of whatever that core wound, faulty core belief, shame narrative that you talked about, Chris. That's really where the magic is. That's where all of the hard work should be pointing me and you and others toward, so that the acting out or the choice just simply becomes a better or more healthy choice, right?
Right. So in that, I'm just curious because you made a comment earlier that behavior modification is a part of the process earlier on in the process. When does behavior modification stop being helpful?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know if I've got a great answer for you. I would just say, for me and my experience, I already talked about why it was important for behavior modification was important for me. It was also important for my spouse at the time. She needed to see and experience and feel a form of safety for her own healing journey that showed up in the form of behavior modification. And so there was really two main reasons why I think it's important for a lot of men at the beginning of the stage. But for me, if I were to stay there, and I stayed there for probably 3.5 years, where it was my journey was only about the things that I did or did not do, looked at or did not look at, behaved and didn't behave. After about 3.5, maybe even 4 years, I found myself in a spot where I was simply a better version of my old self. And I would call my old self as somebody who spent 33 years of just trying to hold on as tight as he could.
Right.
We hear the words white knuckling. I had just become a better white knuckler, living under the veil and the threat of my marriage could fail. And so that was a motivation to kind of carry me into this better version of holding on tightly to the behavior modification part of the journey, as opposed to just simply letting go and looking deeper within and tracing those roots back down through my story.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and tell me if I'm hearing you wrong, what you're telling me is that the behavior modification works until it doesn't, because as you called yourself, a better version, I would say more moral, right?
Yeah.
You were living by the rules better. And when it stopped working, then you let go.
Yeah.
So what's that crossing of the Rubicon from the shame-based, do better, be more, be enough lifestyle that crosses over into, you know what? I've got to get, as you said earlier, curious about some of these things. What's causing these negative emotions and these beliefs that are consistently driving me back into my compulsive sexual behavior?
Yeah. So for me, it was really starting to examine, why do I continue to show up defensively? Why do I continue to look for or seek blame and manipulation in the closest relationships? At the time, I was still married. Why is anger such an easy response for me when I'm really trying to live out the fruits of the Spirit? And so for me, it wasn't so much about why do I keep going back to, some version of acting out, because my white knuckling was actually working until at some point I'm sure that it wouldn't work. But at the time, the living under the threat of no longer being married was working. But yet at the same time, I wasn't changing. And I know we've talked about that in one of our past podcasts together. But I started to look at the internal version of myself and how that was being manifested inside of my relationships, that really caused me to look up and say, this behavior management / not dealing with my shame part of recovery just isn't taking me anywhere. Right. And just to get real specific, Chris, I mean, one of the turning points for me was reading a book of Why Does He Do This? By Lundy Bancroft. And it's a book. Okay. It's a book on abusive behaviors, and it's a 300 and some page book with 1-page narratives of what an abusive behavior might look like. And I read the book, and I would scan each page, and I'd be like, oh, that situation that looks and feels like me in the past. It's like, oh, that's kind of scary. And then I would hit 2 or 3 of those pages, and I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, am I abusive?" And then I'd find a page or two where that situation or that scenario didn't describe me. But by the time I was done reading all 300 plus pages, there were more pages that described me and my behaviors and how I related to others than there were not. And I will be honest, the book scared me into a place where, if this is how I'm relating more often than not to the person that I'm supposed to protect, to the person that I say that I love, the person that's my strongest attachment partner, who I want to spend the rest of my life with, there's a whole lot more to this process for me than just simply watching my eyes and stop looking at and stop doing type of behaviors.
Yeah. So you heard it here first, guys. If you're struggling with persistent anger, manipulation, and self-justifying behavior, you might be coming to the end of your shameful process.
Yes.
You might be opening yourself up to maybe there's something different. Maybe there's something more that I haven't seen, that I haven't become curious, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I've become curious about, because I would suggest, and Rob, I think you painted it beautifully, is that, behavior modification, behavior management, while it can be a way to walk the path for a while, ultimately doesn't get to the heart of the issue.
Yes.
It doesn't address me.
Yes.
And what I'm wrestling with.
Yes.
And I think you painted that beautifully in your story. And I just want to point out, not shamefully so at all, just truthfully so, did the behavior modification save your marriage?
No, not even close. No.
And so, guys, that's the difficult thing to wrestle with is if you're trying to save your marriage, you can't.
Yeah.
Because that's a cooperative effort between you and your partner. And, the only thing you can do is do the work that you need to do to become a healthy, integrated person. Yeah. And so, shame is not a part of that process. In fact, I would say this. I would go as far as to say this. Shame and ultimately behavior modification alone strategies are the enemy because they're not going to free us to become the men that we were designed to be. It is love. It is forgiveness. It is acceptance. It is vulnerability. It is curiosity. Those are the pathways that are going to allow us to be who we were made to be.
Yeah. And
gratefully so. So any last thoughts as we wrap up, Rob?
Oh man, I could talk about this for another 3 hours. So a great topic. Let's come back to it. And let's talk about what role curiosity plays in this journey of going from behavior modification to a more integrated, a deeper look at how recovery can actually create and become a whole person, not just help manage or take care of part of the person.
That, my friends, is called a tease. So you got to stick around a week for that one. That's coming back at you on The Mirror with Chris and Rob. We'll see you guys soon. Take care.
See you, Chris.
See you, Rob.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris at pornfreemasculinity.com.